Hello, my name is Jamil Spain, developer advocate with the IBM Cloud. And today's topic that I want to discuss is hyperautomation. Now, I'm the product of two parents that had a long career in education. So naturally, in my household growing up, when we didn't understand something, the first instinct, like a word, was to break it down to the smaller parts here. And I wanted to kind of do this exercise with you today as we analyze this word. And on a second thought, as technologists, you're going to see a lot of terms that occur here and there. So it's helpful to kind of understand the context. So get a good method to understand context just by breaking it down to different parts. So let's take the first part, the hyper. Now, with hyper as an adjective, that can naturally mean that you are extremely I had to stick that in there. Sorry for the typo. Extremely active for what you're kind of working with. So you can say like something is well, it's kind of used to describe the word hyper. But then you have the other context of it being like a prefix, like hypersensitive, hyperactive, and that kind of means kind of like beyond or kind of above. And these are all from Merriam-Webster, m-w.com, one of my favorite places that I like to do. So we kind of use that context here to really kind of understand what it kind of looks like. So we're really talking about above, being very excessive or going the extra mile with automation. Now, automation, another word, you can't just really break it down that way, but we know from technology that the automation really applies to some techniques to facilitate automation from a technology perspective. And let's go through a few of those from what we kind of learned from these other videos, and I'm just going to summarize it here. And then we'll put the two together for a small use case to show how we can hyper automate. All right, made a little verb there. All right, so the first is the word RPA. So you have RPA, one of the most popular techniques here. All right, I would try to write all that out, but let's say the robotic process automation there. It's the process of using bots to accomplish redundant tasks. All right, so the most popular way is that you have a website that you want to kind of do the repetitive task of data entry. I can feed a bot a JSON object or some data payload, and it takes that information and does the process of filling out a web form, which hereby gives me data input there. So bots do data. One of the scenarios that can happen there as well. So we have a second use case for AI or NLP, so that's using artificial intelligence or natural language processing, which is generally the process where it's pretty much making systems understand human language. Abbreviate that there. So I can feed it a sentence and it kind of understands some context of what I'm kind of referring to and making some decision based upon that particular context that we're talking about. Now I did a video on business rules. You may want to check that out, but that brings up my next topic of BPM, or I'm going to abbreviate it as business rules, but we'll say the BPM is business process management. And when we went through the business rules video, we kind of discussed how you can have certain template sets of actions in place. So again, I feed it a data payload or some type of data that describes a particular workflow that I'm going through, and based upon it, I have preset actions that will execute based upon the information that has been supplied. So definitely being able to actually make decisions. All right, based on the data. Okay, and lastly, in this context of automation and building these tools, you're going to have something, usually a low-code, no-code UI. So you'll have the circumstance where I'm able to really orchestrate an experience using different amounts of these tools um, with a particular interface that helps me kind of build this and really accelerate the way I can build these processes and go from there. Another thing with the BPM, at some point I can make decisions not just how to process data, but I can make decisions on when I need human interaction as well. And because we kind of go through and building these type systems, they can be reused in many different contexts here. So we define the hyper, which we know going above and beyond. Let's use the positive aspects of there. And then we have the what facilitates automation from that perspective. So hyper automation, putting them together, is using one or more of these methods. Okay, we've gone above and beyond. We're not using one, we're using a series of these in a workflow to accomplish a task. So let's take a look at what something like that might mean. And when I sat and I said, okay, how can we illustrate something that really defines this? I have kind of seen some particular scenarios that I think may apply here. So let's take the process that I've seen maybe of you renewing your license. And all right, I've seen many systems kind of facilitate that process. A very repetitive task, definitely, that needs to scale out across many, many different people. And although we love going to the local driver licensing office and standing in line, it's a perfect activity to be facilitated through hyper-automation. Let's break it down here and prove my point here. So let's say that to start off, you'll have maybe some, let's add one more piece here. One thing you can do with AI is having bots that intake data. Okay, reason I mentioned that because this use case is definitely going to use that here. So let's say that we start off by having a chatbot. And I'm going to be at my computer and you tell me that in order to be able to renew my license, I have to first interact with a chatbot, which is going to ask me a series of questions that it's going to use a little bit of natural language processing to understand my requests, okay? It's going to probably ask me my registration, what's my title, or maybe my license ID. Use that, interpret that to go back and make queries to understand what is going on there. And from that state, it helps then useful to kind of process me into a BPM or some process engine or a business rules where I can say that I need to actually maybe say, is it active? All right, has it been a little while? If so, maybe I need to route you to talk to someone, or maybe I want to check secondary systems. Maybe I want to check to see if you have a safety inspection filled out on file already, or I want to check with other agencies to maybe you want to check with Def Records to see if there's someone that is deceased and not actually alive. So maybe to check for fraud or any other circumstances there. Just throwing out a couple of scenarios there. But I can make decisions to route you in a certain way, or actually and take your data that you've given me and ask you more questions, and then take that, build me a full object that I can then pass off to maybe some robotic task here. Maybe the system that we use to actually order the new licenses or new registrations may be a legacy system. So instead of paying someone to fill out paper forms, send that data in, mail it a fax, and then they have to manually enter it into a system, I can use the chatbot to ask questions using NLP to get the right data set that I then need to feed into a bot, which can then fill out the process. And next thing I know, a week later, my license arrives. Now, this is just one example of a use case that you can do, but you can definitely see how all these elements can kind of work together. And most importantly, having a low-code user interface to orchestrate that whole process and have the visibility and operational aspects there to work. But definitely, take a look at any of these methods. Definitely learning or being hyper Being able to hyper automate yourself requires you to have some context of these different areas, but put them together, and I'm interested to find out what you can create for your next project. Thank you for your time.
If you have any questions, please drop us a line below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please like and subscribe.